Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today I will review more cards from the upcoming expansion for Star Wars Unlimited Shadow of the Galaxy. So, as usual, this is our first impression analysis, I haven't played with any of those cards, and we only know very little about the card pool and the synergy in which those cards are meant to be played with. So everything I say has to be taken with a grain of salt. But this time I'll try to commit myself a little bit more by giving some first impression rating on any of those cards. And without further ado, let's go into it. The first card is Cartel Ton Coat. So as usual, I'm gonna consider that you've already read the card and you know what it does. So this is obviously meant to be an aggressive card. 2, 3 for 1 in space is a very good ratio. Right now, we haven't seen really aggro decks that relies on 1-drops, because I think in order for 1-drops to be very good, you need to have a critical mass of them, so then you can open up with double 1-drop. Normally, 1-drops are very vulnerable and get killed very easily, but this one is not. With the 3 health, it's going to be very difficult to get rid of it. So I think it's pretty good. The fact that it makes your opponent draw a card is kind of a big downside, but it's going to be relatively difficult to get rid of this unit, which means that the drawback is not going to be a huge deal most of the time, I think. Also keep in mind, cards advantage not really that big of a deal in Star Wars Limited, generally speaking. So I feel like the card is fine. The biggest weakness of the card is the fact that it's not a rebel, so it cannot be boosted by Metal Ceremony and those kinds of 1-drops. You really want them to be boosted by Metal Ceremony. Or like it doesn't work with, cannot be boosted by Fleet Lieutenant and Wing Leader. In set 1s, early drops really need to have Rebels to be good. But in set 2, maybe they'll be different. Maybe in set 2, aggro decks are not going to rely as much on the Rebel package. So maybe the fact that it's missing the Rebel trait is not going to be that big of a deal. From what we know, I'm just going to give this card a 6 out of 10. I think anything above 5 out of 10 is competitively playable. Even a card that is, I would say, 4 out of 10 would be playable competitively, but very situational. I think this card is a bit more than situational. I think it is quite situational, but I think it's going to be... I would be surprised this card doesn't see any competitive play. Next, we got DL44 Blaster. This card is pretty good. First of all, a way to boost your damage, to boost your attack for only 1 resources. So I don't think there's anything in the game that can give a +2 attack for only 1 permanently. But the real asset of this card is in the new smuggle mechanic. So smuggle basically allows you to play the card from your resource. So you resource the card previously, and then at any time, instead of playing a card, you can play a card, but from your resource pile. And what it does is that you get to play the card that you reveal the card and put it in play from your resource to play, and then you replace it by an additional resource. So the additional resource that you get from the top of your deck to replace the one that you smuggled comes into play exhausted. However, you can play the exhaust cost with the by tapping the exhausted resource. So the smuggle card itself can pay for itself, and when it will come into play, exhausted if it's a unit. If it's not a unit, then it's not going to come exhausted. So so yeah. With that being said, I think the card is the smuggle mechanic in general. I think is a very cool mechanic. I see this a little bit like utility lands, or what we call man lands in Magic the Gathering, where you get lands that can turn into creatures or lands that can turn into spells, like basically lands that gives you a utility. And smuggle is kind of the same thing, because it's resources that has utility, that can, even when it's been played as a resource, can be used later on to give you some sort of utility. And utility lands in Magic are very useful because in Magic, you can run out of card very easily, because not only you're only drawing 1 card per turn, about a third of your cards are actually resources. So whenever you put yourself in a top deck situation and you don't have a draw engine, you really had a huge disadvantage. Star Wars Unlimited is not like this at all. You draw 2 cards per turn, and you also get and every card you draw is an active card. So you don't really have the same problems. That's why card draw is not as important in Star Wars Unlimited. And also the other factors is that um, you basically never run out of things to play. So in this case, having your resource having some sort of utility is not as big of a deal in Star Wars Unlimited that it would be in Magic. So I don't expect smuggle as a mechanic to be as important as the utility lands in Magic. But if those cards are very pushed very hard, I can see them being pretty strong. So this one is a good example of a smuggle card which I think will see play, because the smuggle is actually pretty much almost a surprise strike. A surprise strike gives +3/+0 and a free attack for 2 resources. This card does +2 attack only, but for 1 more resources. But the +2 bonus is permanent, not only temporary, and obviously it smuggles, so it is placed from your resource pile. So I honestly think this card is gonna see play in. I would be very surprised if this card doesn't see play in aggro decks, in red cunning aggro decks, which already do exist and I think are pretty competitive. Yeah, I'll be surprised if it doesn't see play. Another limitation of the card is that it doesn't work on vehicles, which is definitely a big deal, because whenever you have 2 units on the arena, one of the advantages of Surprise Strike, it works on either arena. So I don't think it's going to replace Surprise Strike, but it's very strong. It doesn't work with 4 cards, I believe in, so there's a few limitations, but I think the card the card is actually very solid. Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. I think it's gonna be a solid aggro card. We'll see if it gets played. Then we got another smuggle card, and this card got discussed a lot, and it is Timely Intervention. So this card has the ability to give ambush to any card in the game. So a lot of people have been kind of super crazy about this card, saying this is one of the best cards in the game. It is basically the effect of ECL on the card and all that stuff. And if ECL is the best base in the game, then a card that does the effect of ECL has to be broken. Like, if a card is broken and a card looks like that card, then that card is broken. And I want to debunk a little bit that thought process, because there's many instances in the history of Magic the Gathering. Once again, we can learn a lot from Magic, where the designers designed a card that was very reminiscent to a previous card they made, and that new card that they created, and everybody got have a tendency to really over-evaluate that new card because it's similar to a previous card made before, but they don't realize that the few differences that those cards have make the entire difference. This is here, I think it's pretty much really clearly a scenario like this. So here's the problem I have with this card. So first of all, let's talk about the qualities of the card. So the qualities are: giving ambush to anything, as we saw with Energy Conversion Lab, is extremely powerful because it makes certain cards which that can really benefit from ambush. There are certain cards that really benefit when they get ambush. A good example for this is Zeb, for example. Steadfast Battalion, probably the most famous example. And even to some extent, Boba, Disintegrator Boba, the unit, this card really gets a lot stronger when it has ambush. And those cards really gets a lot of benefit from ambush. Because they have an effect that if you can catch your opponent by surprise, they have very powerful. They've effect that can be very powerful. Zeb, typically, if you do not play this with ambush, your opponent can very much play around the ability. If the card comes out of ambush, very difficult to play around it. That's what the Timely Intervention is for. That's what ECL is for. But here's the problem with Timely Enforcement. The Timely Reinforcement, in order to play that card, you have to pay 1 resources on top of the price of the card. So it makes essentially the unit cost 1 more. And if you pay attention, you will realize that usually 1 resources is usually the price tag that FFG has been putting on ambush. If you think about any card in the game, you remove ambush out of that card and you make it cost 1 less, and that's about the card you would get for that price. More or less. And so timely intervention, yes, okay, cool, it gives ambush to anything, but making the unit cost one more is a massive, massive deal. One of the reasons why ECL is so powerful is because ECL is free. ECL can be used on curve without any additional cost. And just think about every single application that you have of ECL. ECL Super Laser Technician, ECL Steadfast Battalion, all ECL Zeb, any of those ECL usage that we commonly see, you would never see. Those play will not be nearly as powerful if they came into play one turn later. So typically Steadfast Battalion, the reason why it's so powerful is because it comes out at the same time as your opponent leader. So your opponent gets out, is Boba, you can ECL into Steadfast Battalion and one-shot that Boba. Same thing with any other card. So that's another very important thing to keep in mind with this card. Is that the extra cost, it's not, the card does not cost one. It costs one on top of the card of the price of the card you're playing with. That's a huge limitation. Another big limitation for this card is the fact that you have to draw it. One of the reasons why it's so strong with ECL is the fact that that it works, that it's always available. So all you gotta do is draw a card that works well with ECL, and then you can use ECL to some great extent. Timely intervention needs to be drawn on top of the card that you want to ambush. So you need to draw the timely intervention, and then you need to draw whatever other card you need to combine it with it. And not every card works really well with ambush, especially if you have to pay one extra for that card. So it is a strong limitation for this card, is that it's going to be a lot more difficult to pull out the quote-unquote combo, and it's going to take a lot more space into your hand, which is a big deal. The third problem with the card is the card disadvantage. So I've talked about this earlier, and yes, in Star Wars Limited, card advantage doesn't really matter. You can play a deck that doesn't have any card draw, and you're not going to have any problem with that. And making card advantage, at least drawing extra card, is not necessarily going to be a big deal most of the time. It depends on the deck, once again. It depends on the situation. But most of the time, card advantage is not really a big deal. However, card disadvantage is a big deal. If you have a deck that starts making card disadvantage, you're going to have some sort of ways to get back those cards. This is the reason why if you're playing a hand deck is known... Hand deck typically uses ability about 2 times per game. So it's only 2 cards advantage that you're doing per game, but those 2 cards advantage is really going to put you very tight in terms of cards. So this is why you really need to have some sort of effect that allows you to get back your cards. That's why people play Momothma, that's why they play Bright Hope, that's why they play those kind of things. That's why they play Timely Reinforcement, U-Wing Reinforcement. So if you do cards advantage, you need to have some sort of effect that allows you to counterbalance this. So the fact that you're doing cards advantage with timely intervention is a big deal, and you gotta keep that in mind when you're building your deck. So obviously you can circumvent that issue by using this card with smuggle instead of just simply playing the card normally, but in this case you have to pay 2 on top of the price of the card, which start to become very, very expensive. So with all that being said, I think Timely Intervention is a good card and definitely going to have a lot of great combo potential. I think it's going to be combined. People are going to be trying to build around this to try to create some interesting combos with it. And the fact that you can have this on top of ECL is going to make it very consistent. It's going to give you like a lot of consistency if you find like a specific combo where ambush is particularly strong. Another benefit of that card is like it works on unit of any size, not only unit that cost 6 or more. And we know that very, very large units, like for example, Reinforcement Walker or Avenger, really benefit a lot from an ambush. Like Avenger comes into play, kill something, then attack right away, kill another thing. That can be very powerful. That can be powerful. And actually, Avenger is not a good example because your opponent can just sacrifice the unit that is being attacked, so it's actually not that beneficial. But I think a better example would be Reinforcement Walker, because Reinforcement Walker then gives you double trigger on it right away, a little bit like when you use it with Piet. So there's some cool things to do, and I'm sure that as we're gonna see more and more cards being revealed, we're gonna see more and more combo potential with that card. So it's definitely one of those cards which is gonna get better as the card pool grows bigger. So I think there's a lot of potential for that card, but I think it's gonna be a very purposely combo card that you're gonna be really trying to combo off with. I don't think this is a card you can put in any green deck. People have been saying this is going to be a staple in all green decks. I don't think that's true at all. I don't think it's going to be like this. So I give it a rating of 8 out of 10. I think it's a good card, but I don't think it's as crazy as people say it is, and I don't think it's going to see play in all green decks. I don't think it is ECL at all. I think ECL is way more powerful than this, even though it's a base, so it's a little bit harder to compare. Next we got Privy Crew. So this is like the other smuggle cards which I think are meant for draft. This card is very weak because as a 2/2 for 2 that is just very weak. And then of course you can always play this card as a resource and then play it with a smuggle cost, in which case it comes at 5/5. But 5/5 for 6 is not very exciting. And the question you're gonna ask yourself whenever you are playing this card as a resource is, how often are you gonna actually play this card for the smuggle cost over the 2 cards that you actually draw per turn? So in a case where you're in top deck mode, which is the moment in which you would play a card from smuggle, how often are you going to be playing this card for the smuggle cost? And the answer to that question is probably not very often. So it is probably a filler. I think it's a draft filler. So I give it a 2 out of 10. Vigilant Pursuercraft is also a card with pretty overpriced smuggle cost, but at least here I think as a 5 resources the card is actually a lot better. 2/2 for 2 is really a horrible stat line. 3/5 Sentinels for 5 is not completely terrible, and I think it is definitely playable in draft just to play it normally without the smuggle cost. And then the smuggle is only a bonus, as once again, if you're in that situation where you definitely need a Sentinel, I think smuggle is going to be good not as a way to kind of never run out of things to do, but rather as additional options for you in the later stage of the game. And having that option to get a Sentinel out of your resources can be very beneficial. So I rated this one a little bit higher, even though I still believe I don't think this card is going to see play in Constructed. Then we got another card which a lot of people got very excited about, and I do get the excitement. I think the card from a thematic standpoint is very cool. The idea of a unit that can snipe the other cards, and it also has some combo potential with upgrades. You put some upgrades on it and then you can start sniping units. And all this is from a thematic standpoint is very cool. Also it has tons of traits like Trooper, Clone, Imperial. There's probably going to be tons of synergies around those traits. So there's a lot of cool things going on with this card. It can go around Sentinel cards. It's basically kind of a Han Solo, meaning Han Solo the unit. So it doesn't take any damage back when he attacks something, but it can bypass a Sentinel, which is nice. But with all that being said, I don't think this card is very good. I think, at least for constructed play, I think this card is pretty weak, and the reason for this is because it's very, very slow. First of all, you got to pay 4 for it. Comes into play, does not have an immediate impact on the game. So a card that costs 4 and doesn't have immediate impact on the game is usually not playable in Constructed, unless it does something really good. So Kanan is a good example for this, but Kanan has the advantage of having very good stats, and he also can be used with ECL very well. While this card is a terrible target for ECL. So Kanan is kind of saved by ECL. I think that if Kanan, if the Force was not a useful keyword, if Kanan did not have the Force trait, and if it was not a good combination with ECL, I think it would be I think nobody would play it. And I think this is kind of that scenario here where the unit is very slow. Once it's in play, the action ability paying 2 resource for +1/+0 for this phase is extremely expensive, and I don't think you're ever going to use that ability unless you really stage a super late game situation. And then the ability is nice, but it only has 2 attack, which really doesn't kill anything. The fact that it can only target enemy ground units also a huge limitations. With that being said, I think you can combine it with upgrades, so you can make the argument, oh, this card is great, you put an entrench on it, you put some upgrades on it, then it becomes really good. The problem is, like, you're already paying 4 for a unit that doesn't have immediate impact on the game, and then you're putting an upgrade on it. Like, this is so incredibly slow. Your opponent is going to have a million opportunities to kill that unit. And even then, you don't have a unit that puts any pressure. You just have a unit that kills other units, and only ground units for that matter. So it is very specialized as well. So it is slow, it is specialized, and it is super easy to interact with. I don't think it's a good card at all for constructed. In draft, I think the card is going to be a lot better, but in constructed, I don't think it's very good. I give it a 4 out of 10 because I think in draft, I think it can be very strong. Next, we have Unexpected Escape. So I like this card on different level. First of all, it is an exhaust, universal exhaust for only one resource, which we've never had. All the exhaust effects typically cost 2, so that's very good. Another thing that I like, I think the fact costing 1 for situational card like this, I think is a very good bonus. Another cool thing is like it allows you to rescue a captured guarded unit. You rescue the card that has been captured by that unit, so it's very strong against of course capture effect, which I'm sure we're going to see plenty of in the upcoming expansion. So it is a relatively specialized card, but even ignoring the freeing the capture card effect, the 1-for-1 is a pretty cool effect, and it is something that in some situation you might need. And I think it's pretty good, and the fact that it's also in blue is a big deal. I think I would have been a lot less excited about this card if this card was in yellow, because in yellow we already have access to a million different kind of exhaust effect, but in blue we don't. By the way, from a thematic standpoint, I'm relatively surprised that this is in blue and not yellow, because to me it sounds like something that is cunning, but not really. Anyway, from a thematic standpoint, it just makes more sense to be a yellow card, but anyway, I'm kind of glad it's not, because I think the card is a lot stronger as a blue card as in a yellow card. I think it's going to be played in control decks. It's not going to see like ton of play. You're not going to be playing this as a 3 of, unless we're really in a weird meta where there's tons of capture effect. But as a toolbox card, like as a 1 of, I think it can be very good. It's also a trick that can be picked up by Jabba the Hutt, just so you know. So I rated this card a 6 out of 10. I still think it's a specialized effect. So you're not going to see people playing this as a 3 of, but as a 1 of, as an option, as something you might want to do every once in a while, I think it's pretty solid. Last card that has been spoiled to us is a card called This Is the Way, and this card is pretty much Prepare to Take Off, but for Mandalorians and upgrades. So just so you know, there's 2 Mandalorians or upgrades. The upgrade doesn't have to be Mandalorian. It's any upgrade or any Mandalorian card. And obviously this is a card advantage. Top 8 digs pretty deep. Right now the only Mandalorian that we know of is the Fang Fighters, the Sabine, and obviously the Mandalorian units that we saw that was revealed to us. So I think this card is obviously the how powerful this card is going to be is going to depend on how powerful are the Mandalorian, and if there's a Mandalorian theme deck that's going to emerge from this, which I would say is pretty likely. I think Prepare to Take Off is a big of a, even though I would agree on the fact that card advantage in this game is not super strong, and a card like Prepare to Take Off would be super busted in a game like Lorcana or Magic. Not as strong in Star Wars Limited, and we still haven't seen many people play this card. So there's no reason to believe that this card would see a lot more play, at least from what we know. But obviously, it really depends on the deck. If the Mandalorian deck happens to be playing a lot of very cheap card, we saw a lot of very cheap upgrades, maybe to work with the Mandalorian leader, you're going to need that card to kind of like load yourself with a lot of upgrades, so you can then play them. Another very cool thing about this card that is not true with Prepare to Take Off is like this card can actually get itself. So if you play This Is the Way and you find another This Is the Way, you can actually grab that card, and that means that you have this very powerful engine of card advantage that you get, which might be super valuable if we're playing tons of upgrades. We also saw Wanted, which is a very cheap upgrade that costs 0. So also the fact that this card is heroic, so it can see play in any heroic deck, is also quite good. So I think there's a lot of good stuff going on with this card that makes it so I think it has quite a bit more chances to see a lot more play than Prepare to Take Off. Assuming we have proper support for Mandalorian and upgrades and cheap upgrades, which I think we're gonna have. So I'm pretty excited about this card. So I give this card a 6 out of 10 as well. So that's it for this preview. Let me know if I missed anything on the newest reveal, and hope you enjoyed that. And I'll see you next time for more spoilers for Shadow of the Galaxy.